either yesterday or the night before. And he responded. So I'm going back to Advanced Status and Driving Down. Somebody swiped my. Those are nice masks. Where did you get them?
His class
They're hitting the turnpike. How bad? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Something fell out of. So a lot of not hanging around.
And we were saying bracha, blessed
Please.
Learning the book of Job on another time, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, and still we bless the Lord, we bless the Lord, and praise God for the time of the sacrifice.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Kirachem av abanim, richam Adonai ayreav. As a parent has compassion for children, so God has compassion for us. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are but dust. But Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children and children's children remains, age after age, unchanging. We always begin this service with Psalms, the oldest prayers that we have going back to the Bible. And in that way, we're going to link the life of Robert Leather to 3,000 years of Jewish tradition, the people Israel, and the eternity of God. Shir Ma'alot. Ehel Sainai, Ehel Harim, Me'ayin Ya'avo Ezri, Ehel Sainai, Ehel Harim, Me'ayin Ya'avo Ezri. Ezri Me'im Adonai, Oseh Shemayim Va'aretz. Hayiten lamot raglecha, al yanum shomrecha. Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha yad yaminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach balayla. Adonai yishmercha mikol ra, yishmer et nafshecha. Adonai yishmer tzeicha voecha, me'ata v'yad olam. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? As if the psalm, which begins with that question, encourages one to lift one's head upward and outward, the psalm then responds with an answer that comes from that experience of looking out even beyond this moment to a vaster world in which all life lives itself out, but in which it continues to be part of all of our lives. The source of my help is the Lord, creator of heaven and earth. He will not let you falter. Your guardian does not slumber. Surely the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He is at your right hand to protect you. The Lord, your keeper, gives shelter. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all harm. The Lord will preserve your soul. He will guard your going and coming from this time forth and forever. Mizmor LeDavid, another of the Psalms of David. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, ino t'reshi yarbitzeni, almei menuchot yenahaleni, nafshi yishavet. Yancheni b'maglei tzedek l'man shemo, gam kelech b'getz ha'mavet lo ira raki ata imadi. Shiftecha mishantecha hem yanachamuni, ha'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai, Dishanta v'Hashem l'roshi chosi v'raya. Ach tov v'chesed yedefuni kol yimei chayai, v'shafti b'veit Adonai l'orech yamim. Those are the Hebrew words of Psalm 23, a psalm we know so well from settings such as this. We sometimes refer to it as the Shepherd Psalm, and I'm sure many of you know it from memory, so recite with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This past Shabbat, we concluded our readings from the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, the biblical book of beginnings. And it's in that book that we learn not only of the beginning of life, but we also learn of life's end. And there we see that at the time of the passing of the matriarchs and the patriarchs of our people, it is members of the family who come forward to speak words of memory and words of eulogy. So in keeping with what is truly an ancient tradition, we're going to hear from Robert's family today. And Ken is going to begin, and then Sam will follow. After that, Alex, and then Flavia and Bianca together. Ken?
Kind of lost my way to get up here, and I am not checking emails, I promise you, TikTok. Not sure why I'm always asked to speak at these events. First our mom, Aunt Shirley, and then our dad, Uncle Stan. Well, here it goes. Robert has always meant a lot to me, whether it be the good, the bad, or the ugly. He's the oldest brother, and that's his job description, Robert Lindemann reminded us when we first met. The bad and the ugly will be left for close relatives and friends to speak and laugh about later, as Robert was always amazing at taking jabs from us, especially me. That's the job description of the younger brother, to harass the older brother. After Robert's passing, I wrote some things on Facebook to let friends and family know about Robert's passing and some of his accomplishments. Since that post, many people, some of whom I've never met, reach out to me and let me know how they knew Robert, their memories, and what Robert meant to them. I had to ask, who is this guy who many people call Bob? Of course, our family knew him as Rob or Robert. One person mentioned how Bob was instrumental in the beginning of his political career. Actually, many people who I talked to said the same thing. Some mentioned as Mayor of Palmyra, he was always present to take care of his constituents, like trash issues at 2 a.m. or just a chat. One of the reasons Robert was so successful as a mayor of Palmyra is that he would go door to door to meet as many people as possible. He would speak with them one by one for as long as they wanted to speak. Another person saw Robert several years ago, could not place him at first, only to realize he was the mayor of Palmyra, her town when she was younger. Bob officiated the wedding of her older brother. As mayor, one of his many duties was to officiate weddings. He did a lot of weddings during his 16 years as mayor of Palmyra. As a matter of fact, he met Flavia at one of the many weddings. What can I say? Robert meant a lot to a lot of people. Robert, may your memory be a blessing, and you will live in our hearts forever.
Sim.
Good morning. I want to thank everyone for coming out and honoring my brother, and for people remote video. Didn't get a chance to sleep last night, or many nights, and this is the first time I've ever spoken at a funeral. Usually, in our family, usually Kenny is the one that takes charge, and first time speaking at a sibling's funeral, and hoping it's the last. I don't know how to take that, if it's good or bad, but who knows. And Robert had a great sense of humor. I remember teasing your dad that he was a little bit on the older side when he had you. I can do the math, 68 minus 18, so of course I'm 61 and have this little guy, so he would appreciate that. When I spoke to Harry and Rabbi, they said that I should write things down. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know that I can actually write a whole speech with the verbs and the nouns and everything to get across what I want to, but so I wrote down some bullet points. I miss my brother. Passed away at 68. It wasn't his time. He wasn't ready. In life, some people, when they get older, have time to think about their mortality and plan. And sometimes things happen in life that we have no control over. Life is brief, and in the general scheme of things, we all just have a short period of time on this earth. But he had a lot to live for. And I can tell you, we had beautiful children, former wife who was there in the last month every day, and Bianca, beautiful, Alex, quiet, reserved, a lot of dignity, a lot like his father. His father would be very proud of him. Also like my dad, although a lot cooler. So, this is about Robert, not about me, but I really can't talk about Robert without talking about my experience. Life is kind of a series of memories that we have that we collect over time. And some of them are kind of fuzzy and some stick with you and you remember. And Robert was my protector. And there's some things that, maybe my brothers don't know or they do know, but he was there for me growing up, covered for me a lot. And I shared with the rabbi a couple stories. So we grew up, as you know, in Pensacola, New Jersey, middle class, working class neighborhood. And life was great. You know what? Things were different then. I don't know. My parents used to say that. We played outside, played wire ball, wall ball. We played sports. I remember my brother as a younger kid taking the wagon down the street and selling something called yum-yums, which were water ice. We used to play across the street in the backyard, in the baseball field, great left-handed hitter. But growing up in an Italian Catholic neighborhood, and then we had Steiners, Toby's here, the Steiners, and our rabbi. And Robert was always there for me. As you know, Robert's a collector of political campaign buttons. So growing up, I was number 3. Robert was number 1, Arthur number 2, and Kenny was a baby. Robert and Arthur were a lot different, as we all were. Remember, my first memory of Robert was, you know, I'm 6 years younger than he is, and 5 years, Arthur and I, and Kenny, 3-year difference, which doesn't make a big difference now when we're adults, but when we're that age, it's a big difference. So, Robert, I wore the button-up shirt, had his glasses, kind of nerdy glasses, and slide rule, which was kind of like before calculators, because at that time, we didn't even have calculators, microwaves. And Arthur was the cool one with the long hair and the great music, and they were different, as we all were. Robert was there for me when I did a lot of things maybe I shouldn't have, and you know, I shared one story where I was a safety in 6th grade. And there were 2 types of safeties. There were the safeties that wore the orange badges, and they got to cross the kids. I'm sure there was adult crossing guards. And then you can become an officer. And I had to write an essay to become an officer, but the teacher that granted me that position also tutored me and my other brother, so I think maybe because my parents paid him. So our goal was to have the safeties get merits, and the more merits you got, you can get like a free Radio Shack. So I had the idea of charging the safeties like $1 each to get merits, and then one of the other lieutenants found out I had to kick back 50 cents to him, so I had to resign my position. And I think it was Mr. Greenberg, I'm not sure. Again, some memories are clear and some are fuzzy, but he gave me a note, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I was really worried about my dad. My mom, but I got away with a lot of stuff with mom, with my dad. A lot like you guys, a lot like Robert, a lot like my mother. And I told Robert, gave him the note, took care of it, no problem. And then, if you guys remember, Robert was into politics at a very early age in high school, and he was a Democrat, and he would write these flyers about the candidates, and I think he was supporting the mayor. So he would take myself and my buddies, and he would have his hand deliver these pamphlets house to house to house. I think he actually wanted us to knock on the door and talk about bullet points about why we should support this candidate. We were only like 8 or 9 years old. So we would take the pamphlets, and then Robert would promise us to take us to King of Pizza a couple hours later. So we would hand out the pamphlets for about like 15, 20 minutes, make sure that he was driving the points. I guess he was in high school. We would make sure that he wasn't looking, and he took the pamphlets, dumped them in the trash, and went to our special fort behind the Bodner's house, and hung out and drank UU and what other stuff we stole from 7-Eleven. And Robert knew that, but it didn't matter. He was my biggest supporter. When I played baseball, whatever I did, he was always there for me. And I miss him. I love him. I'm proud of all of them. Arthur, she's at MIT, 15 years, bragged about it, bragged about Robert being the mayor. Kenny moving to California, finding a wife who's successful, and I'm kidding. But I'm proud of all my brothers. I love everyone. Robert was there for me at a time, and it's kind of personal, and I'll end it with this, but 15 years ago, So I had some issues with substance abuse and codependency, and got myself in some trouble with my professional license being in jeopardy. And so I took an involuntary vacation in upstate Pennsylvania. And Robert, who never did a drug, smoked a cigarette, drank, was there for me. And, you know, Robert didn't judge at a point when addiction was looked on a little bit differently 15 years ago than it is now. And he helped me through everything, and I'll never forget that. And then when I finally got myself together, I'm like, what am I going to do? And he was always there teaching me just to be honest. And Robert was one of the most honest, kind person I've ever known, with a lot of integrity. And I really will miss him. He left this earth too soon. I know after I got my life back together, he used to call me all the time. He's much better at calling me, and when he called, I would think to myself, okay, it's about a sore throat, or his migraine, or something like that, or someone died. But more often it was to see how I was doing, especially during COVID period, when he was concerned about, I work at a hospital taking care of patients with COVID. And every day he would call me. But there was nothing else I could do. That was my job. And I had the responsibility, when he got sick, a little heartburn, which led to a cardiac catheterization and bypass, and one thing led to another. And I had the power of making some decisions for him. Life sometimes isn't fair, but we're going to miss him. And I'm really learning a lot about things that he did and the effect he had on people right here in the last 15, 20 minutes. It means a lot to me. I'm glad to see my brothers here. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to miss him so much. Thank you.
Alex.
Okay, I won't be up here long. I first wanted to take a moment to thank you all for coming to remember my dad. My 18 years of life, my dad has taught me so many life lessons. I learned from my dad the value of hard work, honesty, and integrity. Whenever I needed help with anything, he'd be the first person I'd call. I know my dad was proud of me, but there's so much more I wanted him to see me do. I'll remember all the talks we had, all the football games we watched together, and all the times we joked around with each other. I put his lessons to good use and promise to honor his memory. Thank you.
Flavia Bianca.
Thank you all for being here today to remember Robert. Many of you knew of him as Robert, Cousin Robert, Uncle Robert, or just Bob, as he liked to be called, because he seemed more approachable. To our family, he was known as Rob, or perhaps the most important title he ever had, Dad. 30 years, Robert and I learned to put our differences aside and be parents. Parents who were there for our children's birthday, graduations, school events. Our kids is what united us, and we had a pretty good partnership. We leaned on each other. He was my emergency contact whenever I needed help. With anything, I could count on him, and he could count on me too. I remember one time when Rob called me asking me to come over to his house because he was bleeding profusely. So I rolled my eyes and said, "Kids, let's go." Dad got a paper cut. And off we went, with Band-Aid, peroxide, and gauze in hand. When we got to his place, there was blood everywhere on the floor. There he was in the kitchen, holding paper towels, soaked in blood. I even made a joke. "Geez, you weren't kidding. This place looks like a murder scene. I don't think it's very smart of me to be here. If anything happened to you, you'll be looking for your ex-wife." We had a good life. We laughed a lot. Turns out he just got himself with a can of soup, but he was on blood thinner, so a lot of blood. Rob liked helping people. He always went out of his way to help others. He was always cutting breaks and working out deals with his tenants who could not make rent that month. I never understood that, and I used to get mad at him because some of these people were not very nice to him. But he knew what he was doing. In the past month, while he was in the hospital, he sent me out a few times to collect some of his rent. And the thing he said to me was, "Please be nice to my tenants." Robert was always helping people. He was a simple man who lived a simple life. He didn't care about status or expensive things, but he did have a thing for some very odd collections, as you all know. That was Rob. He was very smart. He knew so much about everything. Whenever we had a question or needed advice on anything, we would go to him. He was so knowledgeable. One thing he was not was tech savvy. When Alex graduated high school, we were there joking around, making fun of each other. When they started calling out names to hand out the diplomas, Rob stood up and had the biggest smile on his face. He was so proud. He said, "Don't worry, I'm getting this on film. I'll forward it to you later." So I just sat there and watched the many names being called until Alex's name came up. After the ceremony, we went over our house for pizza and to hang out as Robert started to check his video of the graduation, only to find out he had the camera flipped, so we had a whole 30 minutes footage of Robert's face. That's all we could talk about that day. We laughed so hard. Rob loved Bianca. He was always trying to find things to do with her. Now that Alex was in college, they were developing such a great bond. He was taking her antique shopping, and she was really enjoying her one-on-one time with her dad. Bianca was very protective of her dad, always calling him out when he was not wearing his mask properly. He loved the attention he gave her. Bianca does not know this, but while he was discussing his options, Robert said, "I have to do this. I have a 13-year-old daughter." Robert would do anything to live for his girl. He wanted to be there for you, B, and I want you to know that. This past September, we took our family trip to New York City to celebrate Alex's 18th birthday. We took the ferry to Ellis Island, visited the Statue of Liberty in Times Square. We had a pretty good day. Rob hated my driving. He always said I drove too fast. On our way back, he said he would never drive to New York with me ever again. Little did we know, he was right. That was our last car trip together. Early November, Rob called me asking if I could pick him up after because he was having a procedure done. This was pretty normal routine for us. I didn't think anything of it. I told him to call me when he was done and I'll pick him up. Later that day he called me saying I did not need to come. He was going to be staying there for a few days. He was going to need bypass. That afternoon I drove to the hospital to see him. He was beside himself. We just stared at each other, scared. I could tell he was totally shocked, but he was going to do whatever it took. So he went through with the bypass. After the bypass, his heart ejection fraction got worse, and he was hooked to an impeller, a machine that was going to help his heart. but things didn't improve. And they needed to transfer him to Pennsylvania Presbyterian Hospital because there was a doctor there that could help him. They told him he was going to need an LVAD, a pump that would assist his heart. And he would have to live with that for the rest of his life. Rob was so brave. He was determined to do whatever it took to live for his children. Robert was in great shape. Everything they told us sounded promising. Although terrified, we were hopeful that everything was going to turn out all right. We had a plan. So we were on board with his decision, and we put our faith in God in the doctor's hands. But things didn't go as planned. And after 1 month in the hospital, after he fought so hard, our lives were changed forever. Our hearts crushed. This was not going to be a battle that he was going to win. I promised Robert I will be by his side, always, no matter what. I feel very blessed to have had the opportunity to fulfill my promise to him, to hold his hand till the end. I had the privilege to tell him everything I wanted him to hear, to be able to thank him for everything he did for us, to tell him how proud I was of him for putting such a good fight. Rob will not be forgotten. We'll always remember him and honor his name. Robert was a great dad to our kids. They will make him proud. I will always cherish our memories we have of him. We love you, Rob.
Frank.
Thank you all for speaking those beautiful and heartfelt words, which are always so hard to speak at a time like this. I've already noted that this past Shabbat in the synagogue we've concluded our readings from the book of Genesis, Bereshit. The last portion of that text tells of the passing of the patriarch Jacob and also the passing of Joseph. Remarkably, however, the title of the portion does not mention death. Instead, it's taken from the opening words of the Hebrew, Vayechi, which means he lived. The lesson seems clear. At a time of loss, even when a loved one passes way too soon, we do not focus on his death. Rather, we consider his life, how he lived it, and what his life meant. And that is what we've heard from his family. Vayechi. Robert Leather lived a full and meaningful life in the 68 years. He was born in Philadelphia, raised in Pennsauken. We've heard how he was the oldest of 4 boys, Arthur, Sam, Kenny, his brothers. When I asked his brothers about his early years, they said what Sam and Kenny repeated now, that he was sort of a nerdy kid, one of the slide ruler types. Not much into music and certainly not into the type of 60s and 70s cultures that attracted his brothers. Instead, he became passionate about politics and history from age 15. If you gave Robert a date, he could tell you who was the president, who was the vice president, and also some of the other key office holders at that period. And I think it was you, Sam, who said he was some sort of savant when it came to this, a remarkable memory for these facts. But he not only read and talked about it, he got involved. Vayechi. He lived it. Now, we've heard that wonderful story of how he started by distributing leaflets, pamphlets, political pamphlets. Of course, had others do it for him, and how they weren't quite as adept at it as he might have wanted them to be, or as consistent. By the time he was in 12th grade, he was inviting mayoral and congressional candidates to the House to speak. And clearly, when it came to politics, Robert not only talked the talk, he walked the walk. Vaichi. He lived it. He also did that with his interest in history. Between high school and college, he wrote a history of Pennsauken. He was really into it. And while he began as a Democrat, he became a Republican in a family of Democrats, and that, as you can imagine, led to some pretty interesting family discussions. He could also talk sports. The family once ran into Stan Musial at a restaurant, so Robert became a Cardinals fan. Later he followed the Eagles, but he preferred baseball. At some point, Sam got a huge book of baseball statistics, and Robert read it and recalled a lot of what he read. He also played some baseball as a kid, and he was pretty good at ping pong as well, playing many games with his brothers at the basement table. He was a master, they said, of the defensive game. Just kept returning whatever was hit at him. But even more than sports, he was into news and political talk shows, which his brothers were not. And politics became and remained his passion. Robert was a doer. From the time he was a young boy, he worked. We've heard about the Yum Yum cart. He also got others to sell for him there. He had a paper route around age 15, and he was a classical big brother, which meant he could get into it with his sibs, but if somebody picked on them at school, he would be there to stick up for his younger brother. He could tease you, but not others. And occasionally when your folks went out, say on New Year's Eve, Robert was placed in charge, and he wasn't reluctant to assert his authority and send you to bed. But although he would do these things to get, although he would do things to get your goat, he was also clearly a caregiver. That's the classical big brother. The book of Genesis is really a story of brothers. When you have brothers, being a brother is a meaningful part of the way you live your life. Vaichi. He went to college at Rutgers, then Widener Law School, after which he established his own practice in Philadelphia, but he continued his interest in politics, pursued it actively. Now, these days, it's fashionable to be cynical about politics. We're all too familiar with the bitter partisan divides in the nation and in local politics. But for Robert, it wasn't politics for politics' sake. He understood it as a way to make life better for people, a way to make the community a better place for everyone. That's political positions based on values, even more than party. That's politics at its best. He was a Republican, but he never put party above principle. And when he believed that something was right, he followed through, no matter what. Two examples were shared with me. One, when there was an effort to put an incinerator in Pennsauken, Robert knew that it would be a source of pollution, unhealthy for those who lived nearby in the community. He fought it, and he won. And that was long before climate change was a hot topic and a popular cause. Then he became the mayor of Palmyra, serving from 1988 to 2003. Elected as a Republican, had the support of the party. But then came the issue of a light rail system, which New Jersey Transit wanted to build from Camden to Trenton. And the plan called for 120 stops a day in Riverton and Palmyra, which Robert knew would have a negative impact upon the nature of the quiet town. The Republican Party supported the light rail, but Robert knew it wasn't the right thing for the community, so he opposed it. An article from the Philadelphia Business Journal in March of 1999 quotes him as follows: "We're not against light rail. What we're against is 120 stops a day." The article goes on to note that Mayor Leather lost the support of the party, which put up an alternative candidate. But here's how the article continues. Leather, though, is confident that he'll win without the moral support or the financial support of the party. In the interim, Leather can keep momentum going toward another project that will further enhance Palmyra. Creation of the Palmyra Cove Wildlife Preserve on 350 acres adjacent to Pennsauken Creek and Delaware River. Leather said, plans which include a 2,000-foot educational center, fencing, trails, and an observation tower will eventually be passed on to the State Department of Environmental Protection. He got the plan through. He was reelected. That's principle over party. It's so impressive. That's how he lived it. Vayechi. This is the type of political leadership that we all hope and even pray for. And I mean that literally, because in Jewish tradition, we pray for good government and leaders every week as part of our liturgy. Listen to just a bit of that prayer. May our elected leaders and all who hold public office exercise their responsibilities with wisdom, fairness, and justice for all. Fill them with love and kindness, and bless them that they may walk with integrity. Clearly, in Robert, that prayer was fulfilled. That's the way he lived it. Vayechi. In addition to his work as mayor, Robert served as an arbitrator for the Burlington Township Health Department and worked for the Woodbury Main Street Project, a nonprofit city revitalization organization. We've heard that as mayor, one of his favorite activities was to conduct weddings, and of course that's how he met Flavia, and those beautiful words from Flavia and Alex and Bianca, who also shared with me how much her father meant to her. Those will certainly be part of your memories forever. Family was very much a part of Robert's life. Life is also about the little things, and you all know what he enjoyed, like the collecting, the antiques, the swords and knives, the little liquor bottles, and not surprisingly, the political buttons, campaign buttons, which he had by the hundreds. He also continued to enjoy reading history and reading about politics. As we reflect on all of this, all that Robert did and accomplished, everybody here would truly wish that he had had more years. And yet it can be truly said that he lived life fully and well. That's what the Torah means by Vayechi. This past week, as we concluded that book of Genesis, and as we conclude every book of Torah, we did so by rising to recite Hebrew words, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, and let us be strengthened. But those words can be translated in another way. Be strong, and let us strengthen each other. Robert's memory will surely be the source of continuing strength and purpose in all of your lives for all of the days and the years to come. We rise for a final prayer. El malei rachamim shochena b'mromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina b'malot kedoshim utaharim kezor harakia masirim et nihishmat Ruven ben Shmuel HaKohen shehalach la'olamo v'gan eden tei menuchato An habarachamim hastideu beseta kenafach la'olamim u'utzror b'tzror chaim et nishmato haranehu nachlato v'yanoch b'shalom ha'mishkavo v'nomar Amen. O God exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Reuven ben Shmuel HaKohen, Robert Leather, who is gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the kind, caring, and loving deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal with you, O Lord, as it is in the bond of memory with all who are here. You, O Lord, are his portion. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. Be seated for a moment. I just want to note that we'll be traveling from here to Locust Woods Cemetery, and we'll conclude the service there.
Father, please step to the center aisle. I'll ask everyone to rise once more, please.
For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather, a time to embrace and a time to reclaim. עת לבקש ועת לעבד, עת לשמור ועת להשליך, עת לקרוא ועת לתפור, עת לחשות ועת לדבר. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to let go, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak.